Someone will be speaking in French and someone will be speaking in English. And maybe Satish, what will you be speaking in? What language?
Right. So good morning and welcome to this workshop on steady steps, free and open source software and the Millennium development goals. So this morning we have a very eminent panel speaking to you on these topics. And as Nena said, we have a French speaker as well as English speakers. I hope there are no other languages.
Maybe Ruby, Perl, PHP, Python.
Yeah, there is a techie here.
Everyone speaks C.
Speak some of them as well. And we have 7 speakers from different parts of the world. And I'm not going to, Judy is the moderator and she's just composing herself. I'll give you the order of the presentations. We're going to start with Mark, move to Mishi, Nina, then to Yves, who's going to be speaking French, and Nina will translate, and then we move on to Pranesh, and then it will be back to me, and then back to Judy. So with that, can we open? So ladies and gentlemen, let's open this session on the Millennium Development Goals and FOSS. I request Mark to start the discussions off. We have 5 minutes per presenter for the first round.
So, good morning, everybody. So, from my point of view, slow and steady steps and considering open source. Well, to me, open source, the epitome of open source is Linux. And being the techie on the panel, I want to talk a little bit about Linux and where you do not see Linux, because it's there but silent. I'll give you a bit of background. My name is Mark Elkins. I'm on the board of Afrinic. I'm part of the .Africa project, and I've been using Unix per se for quite a long time. In fact, if I go back to when I first met Unix, it was in 1979, part of London University. So when we talk about slow steps, they definitely are quite slow steps. A little bit more about my history. In 1983, I moved to South Africa for a 2-year work contract and still are there. Whilst in South Africa, I've worked for Olivetti for something like 10, 12 years and was in the Unix support department. And I guess it was while I was at Olivetti, Linux first came out. Why was this interesting? Well, up until then, Unix would be more, not proprietary as such, but very much a commercial system, generally sold by Bell Labs, costing lots of money. The difference between that and Linux obviously was Linux was something that was totally free, no cost, no licenses. You could upgrade it when you wanted. You could modify bits and pieces as you wanted. And it was basically the magnet or the collecting block of lots of other different pieces of open source software. From there on, I moved on to running my own ISP in South Africa. Why is that relevant? Well, from me, the relevance is I don't run a single piece of software that is not free and open source. So a full business system running totally on free software. Somewhere in '95, I took over the management of the co.za domain name space. The relevance of that, again, there isn't a piece of proprietary software running the system. Everything is free and open software. So where do we see this free and open software nowadays? Well, I would assume that everyone in the audience has a cell phone, and I would assume that the majority of cell phones are either of the Apple brand or sort of Samsung or LG type device, and all of these are running Linux as the kernel. If you take an Apple iPad and, well, as techie people like me tend to do, you can actually open up that iPad and from a software point of view and climb into it, and there is the Unix operating system sitting in underneath. The problem with Unix is that it does tend to be hidden away. You don't see it, but it is there quite pervasively. Airplane entertainment systems, we all flew here. The entertainment system in front of you when you came here was probably a Unix or Linux-based system. So how big and how small does this sort of software get? Well, if you look at the top 100 large supercomputers in the world, you will find that over 80% of those are actually running a Linux or a Unix operating system. So it certainly works in very, very big systems. Pixel, the film people, they love to use this sort of software because now you can run quite a lot of a large number of very cheap machines to do data processing for the videos, etc. Small. One of the smallest machines that I've seen would be something like the Raspberry. An open source collection-minded people who have taken a piece of hardware, and the default operating system on a Raspberry, of course, is Linux with normally as Ubuntu. What is the smallest Linux box that I've seen? One of the regional internet registries, RIPE, they have something they call the Atlas project. And they have something that looks a little bit like a USB dongle that plugs in just for power, and literally the size of the piece that you plug the Ethernet connector into is the computer. It doesn't do too much, but it does do huge amounts of measurements all over the world. So Linux or open source software runs from very small hardware to very, very large hardware. Why do I like all of this? I guess that's because, and where does that fit in here? To me, Linux or Unix or open source software is a child of the internet, or maybe it's around the other way. They certainly have grown up together. Without the internet, open source, free and open source software simply wouldn't be in its abundance today. Therefore, they are very, very highly related. And what's cool about open source software in comparison to proprietary software, if you're given proprietary software, it's sealed. You cannot get into it really. You cannot change it. You can't really generate much local value from it. Whereas free and open source software, whether developed from scratch or not, you're developing intellectual property in the here and the now, in wherever you are. It can be customized, obviously, to exactly the environment that you're in. And are there great success stories? Well, to me, one of the coolest success stories, and I know this will be touched on later, is, for example, something called Asterisk. For years and years, one of the strongholds, perhaps, of proprietary systems would have been the local switchboard in a company. You would be locked into Siemens or to Nixdorf or whoever was providing the software and the hardware, the solutions. You would have to buy their phones. You could only upgrade with their software. They basically commanded the price. There was no choice. Along comes something like Asterisk. Asterisk being a free and open source software platform sitting on a Linux box. It becomes a switchboard. It has absolutely every functionality of a switchboard, from recording a conversation to generating reports about who's been speaking too much on the telephone system within the company. And you could go out and you can buy SIP-based phones from 101 different suppliers. And guess what? Because of that free and open source, because of open standards, every one of those phones potentially works just fine on that switchboard system, and it all works together, and no one notices. And that, to me, is one of the beauties of this whole thing, is no one really notices. I'm from Africa, and to me, free and open source software allows or is allowing Africa to grow. So again, that is the huge advantage of one of the huge advantages of free and open source software. I'm going to stop there and allow the others to continue from there.
Thank you, Mark. We now move on to Mishi Chowdhury, who's the Executive Director of International Programs at the Software Freedom Law Center, India.
Please tell me if I'm very loud. I am the Director of International Practice at the Software Freedom Law Center in New York, and also a volunteer Executive Director at Software Freedom Law Center, New Delhi. I'm just going to run through a quick use of various technologies which are high-tech and low capital investment. Unlike the economies of the North, who are only now facing the question of innovation under austerity, the rest of the world has grappled with the issue for a very long time. For the past 2 decades, we've seen, as Mark also pointed out, that collaborative innovation has produced not only pretty good innovation, but innovation for which all smart rich people took all the credit for. FOSS has demonstrated a new environment wherein no large capital investment was required to make capital equipment that transformed economic activity. I'm just hoping in the next 10 years, some economist will write a big paper on it and claim a Nobel Prize for it. Well, as also Mark pointed out, and most of you also know, that FOSS made the cloud. Virtualization technologies, which are now underlying the cloud, were produced by a combination of academic research and individual inventiveness, to which business investment came after its economic value was realized and not before. The new global IT paradigm, which is cloud to mobile, especially Android, has brought FOSS actually to everybody's hand palm now, to palm right now. That just tells us that, and in this entire paradigm, proprietary producers such as Microsoft, etc., are so behind in the cloud that they might never catch up. And we notice here that there is a little difference. So when we look at this question which Judy asked me to address, that what does it take to attract investment in infrastructure and encourage innovation? I'm just compelled to say that innovation under austerity occurs in the first order because the curiosity of the young minds are harnessed to change the daily circumstances of life, and second order consequences that population becomes educated. So it is not going to be produced by collecting a lot of money and trying to figure out how we are going to attract investment. It's mostly being other way around, because when we collect a lot of money, we end up paying it to the intermediaries. And the way FOSS economies work, it's on the economy of disintermediation, which is removal of the intermediaries. So for going the other way around, you need the doggedness of the FOSS communities. You need the encouragement across gender. You need the innovation to happen first, and then the business will follow. No revolution has ever succeeded until greedy people ever joined it. So Richard Stallman comes, and then IBM comes in 2000 with $1 billion investment in Linux. Not because they're very interested in the way society is going to be affected, but now it makes all the business sense. So we need ways to spur development without large capital investments in education, governance, and technological development, not only because the economies which are struggling with capital and infrastructure are in a position, but also the North economies are forced to an austerity drive in which they're all looking for a new way to spur innovation. So to illustrate further, I would present a couple of crucial elements which have high-tech, low-capital mobile technology. And these are just examples to illustrate what is going to happen in the post-Android era. We are no longer going to be just dominated by one company owning a green-colored, human-like featured robot. So I'll talk about OpenBTS, Mozilla's Boot to Gecko project, and FreedomBox, Raspberry Pi, Mark mentioned, and something like the Open Source Hardware Association, just to illustrate a few points what's really happening in this cloud to mobile paradigm. So OpenBTS project, very, very interesting, free and open source project, stands for Open Based Transceiver Station, is very successful also in smaller places where it's not very attractive for the network operators to make any investment. since there is nobody to actually milk the money, why should we give telephony to the people who cannot afford it? But OpenBTS, of course, being a collaborative innovation project, it's a software-based GSM access point, which allows standard GSM-compatible mobile phones. They act as SIP endpoints in the VoIP networks, the voice over IP networks. It presents an example of lowest mobile telephony architecture because it makes it possible. You use commodity hardware, you put FOSS in it, and what you have is GSM-based mobile base stations without any high capital investment, which is characteristic of the world's existing network operators. Its first successful deployment was in the island of Niue, a population of only 1,700 people, a small island in the South Pacific. Nobody really wants to get there. But first they go there, OpenBTS starts the mobile telephony, and it bootstraps the later commercial services. OpenBTS is kicked out, now it's become very successful, and the commercial developers are there. The next is the Boot to Gecko, Mozilla's project, excellent project, now creating an implementation of a powerful mobile web platform. So it's going to provide an HTML5 platform for low-cost smartphones. This will drive the post-Android era. There would be entrepreneurship in countries like Africa, South America, India, because although in India itself there are 900 million mobile users, but less than 10% people are smartphone users. And when it is actually web in your pocket, that's what Boot to Gecko is going to get. At the Mobile World Congress 2012 in February this year, Telefonica and Qualcomm have announced their intention to build a smartphone which will be based on Boot to Gecko. So you also have running code and proof of concept here. Raspberry Pi, Mark already mentioned, so I'm just going to say very little about it. It's a credit card-based single-board computer developed in the UK. They were trying to solve the problem of stimulating the teaching of basic computer science in schools. It demonstrates the ease with which low-cost server computers and school workstations can be constructed. There is no hard disk in it. A simple SD card will work on it. A Broadcom SoC, software on a chip, an ARM-based processor, and you're ready to go. Freedom Box, which is probably very relevant to a platform like this because we're at the Internet Governance Forum where privacy has become a big issue. And doses of despotisms are to be seen everywhere. It's a community project which is going to develop, design, and promote personal servers, which will be running free software for distributed social networking, so the thug in the hoodie is not able to run away with all your data. It's going to have email and audio-video communications as well for you. And the complete version 1.0 should be out in February at the FOSDEM this year. Open Source Hardware Association, which is now taking inspiration from what open source did for software, is now taking it to hardware. Already has some well-known examples like a Wi-Fi device called Chumby, a MakerBot, which is a 3D printer. There are other companies also making open source hardware, including Sparkin Electronics and Evil Mad Scientist Laboratories, etc. So why I rattle this out, and probably Mark pointed out that we see FOSS everywhere. Here, because of the internet connectivity problems, we are not able to tweet, but 400 million tweets are sent out every day. And if you study the life cycle of a tweet, you would notice MySQL, Cassandra, Hadoop, Pig, Lucene, Memochen, and a bunch of other projects, whether developed in-house in Twitter or just taken from the pool of collaborative innovation, are there. So, in fact, I'll just wind up. When it comes to looking at the Millennium Development Goals, it seems it's pretty obvious that we need free software, we need free hardware we can hack on. We don't need devices which will look shiny and very pretty, but will not let us look under their hood. We need free spectrum we can use to communicate with one another without any hindrance. We need to be able to educate and provide access to educational material to everyone on Earth without regard to their ability to pay. And if we need to provide a pathway to an independent economic and intellectual life for every young person, whoever 12-year-old is, then free and open source software is the way to go. So it's the other way around. You make the thing first, you have the proof of concept, and the business and investment will come to your way automatically.
Thank you, Mishi. I think the first two presentations have opened up a number of issues on the technical front. We now move on to Nena, who's from the FOSS Foundation for Africa and from nena.org.
Thank you, Mishi. Hello? Okay. Thank you, Mishi. And thank you that you've called it correctly. Mark, I still have issues with you. I have to be very careful because the panelists that we have are quite passionate about what they're talking about. So I'll have to cut them short so that we all flow. But thank you very much. I would like to give this opportunity to Pranesh. Pranesh is the director, is it program manager?
Policy director.
Policy director at Center for Internet Society. Is that correct? Okay, I will give you 3 minutes.
Thanks. Thanks a lot for that, Judy. I think the two most important issues here when we're talking about FOSS and the Millennium Development Goals are equity and empowerment. It's an important part of equity is not just equitable distribution over material wealth, but over control of knowledge. The IP systems, the intellectual property systems that we have today privileges certain forms of knowledge. It privileges newer knowledge over older knowledge, for instance. It privileges mechanically reproducible knowledge over individual craft. And I see the free and open source software movement as part of a larger fight against this inequitable distribution over control of knowledge. What are the ways that free software actually helps? One, it helps in spreading use. Free software, more often than not, also tends to be free as in free beer, not just free as in free speech. One of the measures for Target 8F, that is on making available the benefits of new technologies, one of the measures is internet users per 100 inhabitants. What I find interesting in this is that without free and open source software and open standards, you cannot have the internet at all. So you wouldn't have this measure at all if it weren't for free and open source software. All layers of the internet are built on open standards and free and open source software. Importantly, I think cybercafes way too often tend, at least in the developing world, end up having pirated software on them. So if we are to legalize them, we can't ask them to buy licenses for all the expensive pirated software that they have. And for all of those, there are legal FOSS equivalents. And I already see FOSS packages for cybercafes, which include customized software for running everything from usage monitoring to inventory monitoring, etc. Phones with FOSS are incredibly important, and I think Mishi covered that sufficiently, so I won't quite go into that. But let me just mention the fact that we're doing a study around pervasive technologies right now, and looking specifically at the lower end of such technologies, looking at sub-$100, sub-$50 phones and other such devices, and looking at multiple layers, both at the hardware and at the software layers, as well as the content. And in all of this, FOSS plays an incredibly important role, and in different ways. In sometimes it plays the role of the canary in the coal mine. It is a good test to see whether what lies underneath is actually open standards. If you can build if you can build FOSS on it, that's if you can't build FOSS on it, you know that it's not open standards, for instance. And since Mishi already touched on open hardware, I won't add much other than to say that even civil society organizations are, such as mine, are interested in open hardware, and we have a lab in our garage in which hardware geeks are hanging out, tweaking around with Arduino boards and building interesting stuff. And Francis Gurry, the Director General of WIPO, gave a speech a couple of years ago at CERN, where the World Wide Web was created, where he spoke about how wonderful it might have been had the World Wide Web been patented. And the two subsequent speakers, who are both physicists from CERN, spoke about how the World Wide Web would not have existed had any of those technologies been patented then. FOSS helps with study, and Nena will be covering this in more detail, but without having FOSS as part of the education curriculum, there is no way that we can enable developers and software engineers from being anything more than what my colleague Sunil calls cyber coolies. We don't want to be to just get the fish. We want to be able to catch the fish and ourselves, right? And the moment your aspiration goes beyond just working on the rent track, and you have to teach kids free and open on the basis of free and open source software. For me, I'll just give a few examples of how incredibly important this is. The fact that you can study and customize is. So I'm not a coder, but I was able to use Scraper Wiki, where someone had written a Python code for scraping the Rajya Sabha website, which is one of India's houses of parliament, and for getting information out of that. Now, I was able, without being a coder, to modify that code to get more information that that person wasn't retrieving, to adopt the code and adapt it, I beg your pardon, to the other House of Parliament, to the Lok Sabha, and to run it and to get contact information of parliamentarians all on my own. Now, this would have been unimaginable had I not been able to see the code. And this is just one minuscule example of how important this is for people like, for end users and for civil society, and not just as something important for developers and for businesses, right? There is even with other MDGs. There are projects going on. In India, we have the Health Information Systems Project, which is a not-for-profit NGO specializing in designing and implementing solutions for in the field of health informatics. Access to knowledge is a very important principle, which I believe the MDGs don't address sufficiently, apart from access to medicine. And I'd like to wrap up now and keep some of my other talking points for later. I'd just point out one instance of FOSS actually not being able to help the MDGs, or not sufficiently at least, which is the area of gender equality. And this is something I don't know how to address. There are some positive steps. There are groups such as Linux Chicks and various other groupings like that, but this is a real issue that we must confront in the free and open source software world and find ways out of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pranesh. Gives the floor to Nena. Please begin with the Linux Chicks. Nena, you have the floor.
I won't, because I think that he's trying to make trouble with me. I'll end with the gender issue. I'll end with the gender issue. My name's Nena, and I used to work with the African Development Bank. That was when we were transitioning from what do you call it? Telecopy in French. We're transitioning from one system of telegraphic information to what we are now using called SWIFT. So SWIFT is the system, the information, financial information transaction system. And if you recall, for those of you who've worked in the banking industry, we had the bank going up there, and everyone who worked in the IT and the financial transaction information, we were buried underground because everything you were doing there was kind of secret. And I'm like, why would these things be secret? And most of the things the bank did was secret, almost all information was marked not to be disclosed. Then I went further and I got into the open source movement, and I've been following stuff, and that's why I came here on this panel called Steady Steps. So what I'm going to do is look back at where we've been and where we are now, especially in Africa. I've been in the open source movement globally as one of the directors of the Open Source Initiative, looking at licenses and open standards. But today I'd rather talk on Africa and things happening in Africa. There's a gentleman seated behind. His name is Markan from the ECA. ECA is also the secretariat of the Africa Regional Action Plan on the Knowledge Economy. I don't know if you've heard of that plan, but Africa is looking forward to when our economies will transition into a knowledge economy. And in some countries, like Senegal, 6% of the total national production is already coming from digital and digital-oriented issues. So most countries in Africa are looking towards a digital economy, a knowledge economy, and no longer information society. So I'm looking at it from the economic point of view. Like I said, when I used to work in the ADB, those were, I don't know if we can say closed data or non-open data days. But this same African Development Bank has actually launched an open data initiative. And so my own very bank now has most of these papers. I know I used to work as an archiver in those days. So I used to archive all of that in the normal format they wanted me to do and put it safe and blah, blah, blah. And I've moved off from the bank. And those things I used to have a kind of pride in hiding. The bank has put them out. I'm like, hey, okay, so I've lived enough to see the African Development go actually open in much of its documentation. And I can tell you that it's not the African Development Bank alone going open. The ECA itself has put out its repository, and most of this information are now available. And if you live in the developing world, you will recall that information availability and access to development information mostly used to be a headache in those days for researchers, for anyone working in the development arena. And so the open data movement itself may have been one of the biggest policy gains in our drive towards Millennium Development Goals in terms of open source. Of course, Morocco is the country that first started an open data drive in the continent, and now opendata.gov.ke in Kenya has gone boom. And I will come back to transparency in government later, but I think the Kenya one is the biggest one now. We have some other open data initiatives across the continent, and I'm looking forward that maybe by Indonesia, we won't be talking about steady steps. Madam Chair, we'll be talking about giant strides. Cloud computing has been one of the greatest emerging issues around the IGF, and software as a service and innovation and all of that turn around cloud computing. And I think without open source and that collaboration that exists, we would not be talking about cloud computing today. And I think that a big chunk of our desires, our global economic desires, is actually hinged on cloud computing. And teaching and learning, I think this may be one area that has been hasn't been mined as it should be, but I think that in the next few years, teaching and learning is going to be the biggest point in the use of open source, especially as it concerns universal primary access to education. And we can see that we've moved from the normal, we haven't quite moved, we're moving from where we used to have the teacher and the student to where we're having the education guide and the learner. And everyone is learning and everyone is sharing. So open source has revolutionized teaching and learning in different ways: virtual learning, open learning, massive online education content. And I'm looking forward to open source actually contributing to achieving that Millennium Development Goal, and I have high hopes about that. In content itself, this morning I was having a quick conversation about building content. I do recall when I was in high school and I was doing my undergrad, postgrad, all of that work, every book has a copyright to it, and it was written that you shouldn't photocopy. We photocopied anyhow, because we didn't have the money to buy the books. I don't care whether the word is pirate or whatever, but we just didn't have the money to buy all the books. But these days, with a huge push from UNESCO and all of the open education resource global movement, I think that content is no longer the biggest problem for anyone studying today, especially if you add that to the internet. With Wikipedia or with WikiEducator, with open education resources, I think that the content battle is almost won. It's not yet there, but we will get there. But I do want to put it out here clearly that the open education resources and open learning and the collaboration around content in education may have been one of the biggest things that open source is contributing to education and the Millennium Development Goals. There's something else we might have overlooked that is happening now in Africa, and this is the birth of hubs, innovation centers, co-working spaces. And this I'm interested in, because these are places that use the open source phenomena and begin work together, iHubs, MLabs, and all of that. And these are actually innovation centers. You need to go and see what young people are doing in innovation centers. You need to go and see innovation coming up on every day. And by the way, we have an Africa Innovation Award that comes up. If you want some information about it, a lady is here about the Africa Innovation Award. You may want to talk to her, and Makan will also, her name is Eskeda Nega, and you may want to talk to her about it. So there are quite a lot of innovation coming up from everywhere, and most of these are being born in all these hubs and innovation centers and co-working spaces. And this you need to watch out. And maybe, Madam Chair, in the next 2-3 years, we'll be looking at children who were born in iHubs and MLabs and co-working spaces becoming great economic adults, and I'll really be interested in that. I want to end up with talking about transparency, and we'll talk about partnership. But governance itself is revolutionizing with the push coming from different places, the push coming from open data, the push coming from community participation, the idea that citizens have a say. And I think this is one thing we need to look forward to, because without openness and transparency in governance, we will not make that economic leap. I used to say that it is not work that is the most important difficulty we have, it is the people we work with. And so the open source philosophy itself of openness, of equity and equality, and once again, thank you to the Indian minister that says we're looking forward to move from internet to Equinet. And finally, Pranesh, let me end with the gender issue. I am not a techie. Am I a techie? I wasn't born a techie. No, nobody was born a techie anyhow. Let me rephrase that. My original training was in in psychology, social sciences, history, linguistics, international relations, and law. And none of that has to do with what we call technology. But I have come to know that, listen, if I sit down and put my heart to this, I can actually do it. I can read code. I learned to do HTML. I learned Python. I sat down and read through Drupal, and I put up my website on Drupal all by myself in 4 hours. So if there is anything, if there is any way that ICT can give women equality and footing, this is the place. And I think this is what open source does for people like me, people who work from home, people who have a home to keep, and who can also afford to contribute code, to contribute work from home and earn money. And I think this is one way where, in the drive for women, mainstreaming women in the global economy, we actually need to invest more into open source like technology, because this is where women can express themselves. One thing I love about technology is that it's not a he or a she. Once you pick it up and fashion it, you can make it into what you want it to be. And I want to close by saying that if we're looking forward to MDGs, we need to look forward into bringing women, men, children, innovators into the mainstream. And the basic factor we can have here is open source, from policy, from schools, from innovation, and from all kinds of economic drive around it. And I do clearly believe that people like myself are capital in it. I mean, people like myself who did not study computing, people like myself who want to make money quick and get rich, people like myself who want to stay at home and take care of our families while contributing immensely to the global economy, people like myself who are not male.
Thank you. Thank you, Nena. I began by saying that the panelists that we have are passionate. Now, that is an understatement, because passion does not come this far. Eve and Satish, I hope that you have not been emptied. So I will give this opportunity to Eve. You've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Je vais essayer effectivement de rester dans ces 5 minutes, tout en sachant que personne ne me comprendra et que Nena traduira.
I'm going to do my best to remain within the 5 minutes, because I know most of you will not understand the IT language I'll be speaking. So Nena will be facilitating. So he will do the big language and I will compile and release.
Donc, rapide présentation, je m'appelle Yves
Quick
Maison-Ezo.
presentation, my name is Yves.
Je suis citoyen ivoirien.
I'm an Ivorian citizen.
Vivant à Paris.
I live in Paris.
Intervenant assez régulièrement en fait entre les deux continents, africains et européens.
And I have one leg in one continent and the other leg in the other continent.
Et donc à ce titre, j'espère avoir une vision assez comparative.
So I do believe that the vision I'm going to give you will comprise both continents.
L'idée étant en fait de brosser peut-être une cartographie des business open source qui peuvent se trouver d'un côté et de l'autre de la lagune.
And my idea is to give a broad perspective from the business side of it.
Alors si je commence par le nord, on a à peu près un bon nombre de sociétés qui vont développer des gros chiffres d'affaires. If I begin from what's
happening in the north, there's a whole lot of businesses that are running open source.
Les plus grosses ayant plus de 1000 employés et les plus petites étant unipersonnelles.
Some of them having over 1,000 employees and some on a smaller scale.
Les tailles moyennes d'entreprises dédiées à l'open source sont plutôt autour de 70 salariés.
The average workforce of most of these are between 70.
Mais la majorité comporte plutôt 1 ou 2 salariés.
But the bigger chunk of them have 1 or 2 workers.
Lorsqu'on traverse la Méditerranée et qu'on descend sur le continent africain,
when you cross the Mediterranean and begin to come down into Africa,
on se rend compte que la plus grosse entreprise, en tout cas la plus grosse que je connaisse, va faire à peu près 2 millions de dollars de chiffre d'affaires.
They are not very big, but the one I know that's about the biggest turns around $2 million as its income.
Ce qui pour l'écosystème sous-régional paraîtra très important, mais ce qui par rapport à tout l'écosystème est relativement faible.
Okay, because of the weak business ecosystem we have down south.
Ce qui veut dire que la contribution en fait des économies ou des sociétés open source au PIB est relativement faible.
This means that the economic contribution of open source companies to the national economy so far, it's weak.
La question qu'on se pose donc c'est pourquoi?
So the question we ask ourselves is why?
Surtout lorsque l'on reprend en fait les éléments qui ont été partagés depuis le début du workshop.
Especially if we take into consideration the issues that have been raised around the table.
Capacité d'éducation de masse.
The capacity to do mass education.
Capacité en fait d'intégrer les technologies rapidement.
And to integrate our technologies in economy.
Donc je me suis en fait essayé à une espèce de maxime pour FOSS for D. C'est FOSS pour le développement.
Okay, so what I'm trying to look at it from the development point of view.
Et les transformer en FOSS pour débrouillardise.
Okay, what I'm going to look at, move from FOSS for development into FOSS for...
débrouillardise, c'est débrouiller.
For, I can say entrepreneurship.
Oui,
yeah.
Éventuellement. Donc, l'entrepreneuriat, selon le continent africain, c'est plutôt l'entrepreneuriat de l'utilité. Mettre en relation le besoin local pour le traduire en fait en solution technique.
Okay, when we talk about entrepreneurship, we are looking at needs meeting expertise.
L'idée étant, lorsque le donneur d'ordre exprime son besoin, de lui apporter une solution basée sur des technologies libres.
The one who needs services will meet the one who provides services, and that other one will meet up with the needs.
En cachant en fait les solutions dans une boîte.
And then the one who provides services will hide whatever solutions he has provided in a black box.
Exemple concret, le serveur de messagerie que l'on va embarquer juste dans une machine en n'indiquant pas au client en fait quelle est la solution qui a été intégrée.
And one critical example is the messaging solutions. They just bring it and install it. Don't worry about what is behind it. It handles your mailing and your messaging, and that should be okay.
Donc jusqu'à l'année dernière, jusqu'à il y a 2-3 ans, c'était à peu près le cas.
Up to the past 2-3 years, that has been the case.
Et aujourd'hui, on constate en fait des évolutions qui sont plus métiers, c'est-à-dire qu'on va proposer des solutions user-friendly.
But what we see now is that things are changing and solutions that are being provided are more user-friendly.
Donc des solutions, on en parlait tout à l'heure, de gestion de contenu.
So we're talking about content management systems.
Des solutions de e-learning.
On e-learning.
Et des solutions encore plus critiques qui sont des solutions en fait alors on appelle ça ERP.
And higher solutions that we call ERP.
Sans vouloir faire de pub de solutions, je parle par exemple d'OpenERP, je parle d'intégration d'OpenERP dans Exoplatform.
Okay, OpenERP, I'm not, well, I think it's allowed here to talk about particular solutions that are used for enterprises.
Et depuis un an à peu près, on constate en fait que les solutions qui sont proposées vont toucher tous les secteurs d'activité, tous les métiers.
And what we found out that in the recent times, the solutions that are being brought in by the services are cross-cutting solutions.
C'est-à-dire qu'on ne fait plus de technique pour les techniciens, on fait de la technique pour l'agriculteur, où on applique en fait à l'agriculteur des solutions techniques.
What this means is that we are no longer doing tech for techies. We are doing tech for the everyday person, for agriculture, for schools. Everyone who needs a solution gets a solution.
Je pense que tout le monde connaît ici OpenStreetMap.
I think most of us have heard of OpenStreetMap.
Donc l'idée, par exemple, quand je prends un exemple autour d'OpenStreetMap, c'est d'utiliser les agriculteurs.
The idea of OpenStreetMap is to use agriculturists.
Leur donner en fait un certain nombre de capteurs.
And give them a certain number of captors.
Pour qu'ils puissent tracer leur champ et faire en fait de la géolocalisation.
It is the farmers themselves who will contribute to the mapping.
Derrière en fait la captation de données, l'idée est de créer des statistiques.
And behind data mining, the idea is to create statistics.
Pour que cela puisse servir à la majorité, soit des industriels, soit à eux-mêmes.
So that once this mapping is done, everyone can benefit from this data, whether they are from companies or they are from other places.
Et tout autant pour les gouvernements qui puissent
including governments as well.
Voilà. D'autres types de projets qui sont effectivement à l'attention des utilisateurs, ce sont les projets qui sont open source dédiés mobiles.
We've seen other solutions that are more to other people, especially in the realms of mobile.
L'idée étant de mettre le citoyen au cœur en fait du centre technologique et de l'informatique.
The idea being to bring the citizen face to face with technology and let him be at the center.
C'est ce que tous les gouvernements vont appeler en fait la e-gouvernance.
That is what government today you hear people call e-government.
Et je prendrai par exemple, l'exemple du Sénégal qui a commencé il y a 7-8 ans.
And I will take the example of Senegal that's been around for 6-7 years.
Notamment en fait avec la politique de l'intranet gouvernemental.
Which has started the government intranet.
Qui avait vocation effectivement de mettre le citoyen au cœur du dispositif et qui commence que maintenant en fait à toucher le citoyen en client final.
The original idea was to bring citizens directly into contact with government, but it is only now that this is being deployed.
Donc technologie basique, hein, c'est parti sur du ZOP. Parti avec du ZOP.
Okay. It's a ZOP-based technology.
Et aujourd'hui, je crois qu'il y a encore en fondement, c'est du ZOP, je crois toujours, mais également du March et des solutions de gestion documentaire de type Alfresco.
Okay, originally it was ZOP, and I think it's still ZOP, but now we have management systems like Alfresco mainstreamed.
Alors tout ça pour dire, c'était pas pour faire un catalogue ou un registre de solutions logicielles.
I'm not making a list of software.
Mais l'idée en fait était de pouvoir brosser un certain nombre de solutions qui sont connues, reconnues, éprouvées.
The idea is to lay before us solutions that are known and have been respected.
Et surtout de pouvoir partager avec vous des expériences qui ne sont pas que techniques. C'est-à-dire
and share with us results that are not necessarily techy.
Puisque l'image que les techniciens des FOSS ou des activistes des logiciels libres avaient était d'être ces barbus, chevelus, etc.
Because the original image that has been given to open source are people with unshaved, badly combed hair, beard, and very badly dressed people.
Et donc pour le coup, je conclurai, même si c'est maintenant un peu dépassé, par le rappel du prix Nobel d'économie de 2009 qui est donc basé sur la théorie des biens communs.
Let me close by reminding us of one of the Nobel Prize laureates of 2009.
Basé sur la théorie des biens communs, donc ce qui nous rapproche, qui nous réunit tous aujourd'hui. C'est ce qui nous réunit aujourd'hui.
And it was on this basis that we are here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Nana, for the translation. I will quickly give this opportunity to Satish. We are totally running out of time, so I will request for a rush up. We have a video from one of the presenters, Fernando, that we would like to play after this. And then we will have a round of questions. Thank you.
We might have to truncate that video because we may run out of space or time. Thank you, Judy. I am Satish Babu, the director of the International Center for Free and Open Source Software, India, which, together with the FOSS Foundation for Africa, are the co-organizers of this workshop. I'd like to start by saying that my panelists, co-panelists have mentioned most of the very interesting developments happening in the space of free and open source software. By and large, these fall in the category of not just software as we've seen. It is open source software, it is open data or content, it's open standards, it's open access. And also a range of new developments in the spaces of including things like publishing, music, literature, open access, hardware, etc. are coming up pretty fast. We have seen quite a bit of traction emerging out of governments and civil society. Of course, business was always majorly behind open source. For example, in India, the 2012 Government of India policies mention open source as something that needs to be supported and promoted. And various parts of India have been at the forefront of, the governments have been in the forefront of using FOSS for their e-governance initiatives. And we have already seen education where the latest development is the massively open online courses, MOOC, M-O-O-C, which is again based on the fundamentals of open source. In particular, the role of SMEs and FOSS, small and medium enterprises, where FOSS is a very natural fit, is to be highlighted in this situation. We already heard about incubation and innovation, which again is in the spirit of free and open source software. Now, as far as gender equality is concerned, it has been referred to by two of my panelists. I believe that technology in the last couple of decades is increasingly empowering women. Yesterday in the other panel, there was a discussion on how women are using mobile phones even for their prenatal medical information based on SMS. You know, not just for developers, you know, people like Nina who are, you know, quasi-developers, but even for the user community, technology in general and open source in particular are actually providing more and more solutions by which they can be better integrated into society, including for things like occupational mobility, which means getting flexible kinds of work done even while they're at home, like home-based work as Nena was talking about. So I'm not completely negative about open source and women gender equality. I feel that there has been quite a lot of progress, and there could be even, of course, more progress. Another area that has not been touched upon so far is environmental sustainability. Now, as far as climate change goes, now climate change, that language was not in use when MDGs were, you know, developed, but today the environmental sustainability is also intertwined with climate change, and there has been a lot of application of free and open source in climate change, in adaptation, mitigation, monitoring aspects of climate change. So we have a presence there as well. Open source hardware, Arduino, Raspberry, the whole hacker space, maker space movements, which are now coming up in a big way, where young people and older people also are sitting around in rooms, you know, building stuff, using their hands, using open source components and software, is actually gaining a lot of attention. But the same principles can be applied even to things like agriculture. In India, we have a request now from the agriculture people saying that we want to take up precision farming, which optimizes the use of various resources by precisely monitoring them and then, of course, controlling those resources. And that requires hardware sensors, it requires a lot of playing around and the software, and this is a perfect fit for the open source stack. Open access publications, we have seen the emergence of open access journals, open access publications in a big way. It actually addresses a very central problem in scientific publishing, that you have government-funded research, you have government-funded you know, people who are publishing it, you have reviewers who are offering their volunteer time, but the output is locked by people who, for various reasons, for economic reasons or other reasons. So the rationale for open access publishing is very well known now. And I'll wind up by saying that perhaps the future is also to do with open democracy itself, where, you know, participatory democracy, already there are several open source solutions for the problem of voting securely. Now, that actually is a kind of step forward for us to contemplate what could be the future of not just open source software, but for society at large, that perhaps we could use these technologies for bringing in real representative and participatory democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satish, for being short and precise. I will give this opportunity to 3 very burning questions. I need to push this into a main session so that we can have 3 hours, because clearly 1.5 hours will not work for us. So 3 quick burning questions, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Pilar Sáenz for Colombia. I very enjoy to listen to you because I think that what is doing in Africa and is doing in India is maybe the best way to improve the technology in their countries. But when I think in Latin America, the situation is very different. For example, usually we have education programs which use proprietary software, and the use of free and open software is not good to see, because usually people think that they have to buy a license to be legal, and the most program of the government say that, and it's impossible to us who work with FOSS try to change their mind. So I want to ask about what is the relation with free and open software movements in their countries, in your countries, with the government instance that work with social and educational programs in order to use more software, free software.
Hello, my name is Ben Ako. Interesting presentations. I have a couple of questions to the panelists. The first one is whether the panelists have considered any sets of indicators that would help us gauge our progress towards achieving the Millennium Development Goals using free and open source software. And the second one is whether you have considered that your particular applications in your country context does contribute to achieving the development goals. And if that is so, how?
So, my name is Anawak. I'm from the free software movement in Brazil. And it's more a rhetorical question for all of you, but so free software is all about giving, sharing, and learning. And so if it's given that you gain, so then IGF ecosystems can learn a lot from the most multi-stakeholder environment ever created in the human history, probably, that is free software. So didn't you agree with that?
Thank you very much. Yes, we agree. I will request the panelists to give answers to the two questions, and thank you very much.
If I can go first. Pilan, where have we been involved? Okay, free and open software with governments and education. Uniforum, the CO.za registry, we have explicitly tried to put money or funds back into the industry, or rather the educational industry. So we spent multiple millions developing content, which is the last 3 years of a school curriculum, ICT content. We have explicitly stated that this content is, what's the words? Open source, Creative Commons, that's the word, yes, is Creative Commons. So we spent millions and we're giving it away for free, and we want people to share it, we want people to use it, modify it, etc. That stuff does happen in real life.
The first question you said about that the curriculum is mostly proprietary and it's very difficult to change the mindset. That's not just Latin American problem, that's everyone's problem. But because people have been very active, but to governments, arguments like it's going to create jobs appeals. more than, oh yeah, let's go and change some kind of an education system. But it also makes a lot of sense that, well, once, at least in India, if all your engineers are going to grow up and then they are going to be only engineers who can tinker with one particular kind of software, how relevant are they going to be and how innovative is that industry going to be? That has appealed. There are still, Free Software Foundation India has been engaged with the National Council for Educational Research and Training in changing the high school curriculum, and they have now been at least able to take out the mandatory proprietary software guidelines from those curriculum, but it's not an easy goal. Although states like which Satish can talk in detail in Kerala adopted a political goal to converge to FOSS, and because it became like a political issue, and it was also about, are we going to, it fitted well with their political philosophy, so that's how they achieved it. So I don't think there is a tailor-made answer that how you go ahead and do it. It's mostly developers or software engineers who have become parts of various communities who are contributing to the projects. They go back and tell them how wonderful it is to become a part of the community and how it also creates jobs. And they're the ones who actually help make the case towards the government. But the job creation and the economy part really works with the governments. You might try that one.
Maybe I speak to Ben's questions about sets of indicators. I'm not very sure because when we talk about open source, it's not just the code and the solutions being run. Everyone here came by plane, and when you were boarding the plane, you didn't insist on verifying the plane by yourself, going into the cockpit, checking who is the captain and all of that. You just know that this airline works. The planes leave. Basically, we want to know, do the planes leave on time? Does my luggage arrive? Whatever back office work that is used to manage the transit of the luggage is not your business. As long as you step out and your bag is there and you pick it. And that's the way I like to look at technology. And that's the way people need to look at technology. We don't care whether it's written in PHP or whatever, as long as it works. And that's what is happening today. And the client wants to see that the solution works and it does what it is meant to do. And when I need support, I get it. So I'm not sure that we want to take the open source part out of it and want to do a set of criteria for it. But I do agree that we need to monitor our input into the MDGs, because finally we need to evaluate where we've been. Anawak, yes, and yes. And please take back this message from Brazil that you have been an inspiration to the whole of the open source movement globally. Colombia, I wish you didn't ask that question, because you know that I know that we know what the problem is. The problem is that the people who take technical decisions are not the people who take policy decisions. Okay? We've been there, we've done that, we've seen that. Everyone knows the great potentials of open source in education, the great potential of open source in industry and all of that, but the guy who signs the deal in front of the media is not talking to the open source people. These big players come and says, and especially when they wear the development hat, we are giving your schools $4 million in education support. The minister will sit up and they will write the speech for him and he will make it in front of the national television. He has no idea exactly what it is that 4 million is. Basically, the dollars are going into first year provision of machines and software. Okay? That's year one. Year two, they will ask you to pay 25% of license. Year three, well, you know this thing has been around, but can you pay 50%? By year four, you don't see they have changed the country manager. They've changed the guy you signed the deal with, and you are paying 100%. And at this time, you are tied in hand and foot, and you just have to pay. We've seen all of those. When the plan comes to an end and the countries want to renegotiate, they make it very difficult for these countries to renegotiate. So it's a marketing strategy. I don't blame big marketing organizations who sell proprietary software, and I don't intend to blame them. The people I blame are the people we elect to protect our interest, to make sure that the meager resources we have are used in the best possible ways. And if you do recall, the more open a country gets, the more open source the country gets. In Africa, we've had two different countries that have taken two different approaches. And please, apologies if I may be offensive at this time. We had one country that went boom on the media. We have approved an open policy in the country. It has gone to the government, and then we have 1 year of open policy lovemaking with the open source movement, and after that, nothing. Okay? And we have this other country who says, we don't want to make big media announcements. We want to take it one step after the other. We want to apply it to our people. We want to begin one step after the other. And this is what we see today. That country has taken over in industry, in innovation, in business applications, in citizen, and I'm talking about South Africa and Kenya.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nena.
Oui, je vais juste compléter par
I'm just going to add by saying
les propos justement de Nena.
To what Nena has said.
Si jamais effectivement l'identification des stratégies et des stratèges ne marche pas,
if our strategies have not been working,
ne pas hésiter à utiliser la technique de la double tenaille, c'est-à-dire que de montrer les choses par l'exemple.
And let's show things by example.
Et prendre par exemple l'exemple du Brésil.
And take the example of Brazil, for instance.
Qui en 2005 ou 2006 a mis en place une politique d'intégration dans toutes les universités de serveurs Linux Debian.
That started in 2005-2006 to put in place a policy for the integration of all university servers.
Donc serveurs dans les centres de calcul et postes de travail.
And so they started with the servers and then up to the desktop level.
Ensuite, si cet exemple ne suffit pas,
and if this example is not enough,
j'en ai un autre qui me fait particulièrement sourire, c'est celui de la société Mandriva.
And I have another one, that's the one of Mandriva.
Alors comme on est tous assez âgés ici, il y en a peut-être qui connaissent Mandrake Linux.
And I think most of you have heard of Mandrake Linux.
Si ça n'est pas le cas, est-ce que vous avez entendu parler de Connectiva?
And have you heard of Connectiva?
Je parle à mon collègue du Brésil en fait.
I'm talking to my Brazilian colleague.
Alors, je crois que c'est à peu près les mêmes années, en 2005-2006.
I think it's around the same year, 2005-2006.
Mandrake, qui était la seule distribution Linux française,
Mandrake was the only French distribution of Linux.
Était en perte de vitesse, voire en dépôt de bilan.
And they were losing strength and actually was wrapping up.
Ils se sont rapprochés de Connectiva.
So they came to Connectiva.
Officiellement, ils ont racheté Connectiva.
So officially, what you hear is that they bought Connectiva.
Et aujourd'hui, s'il n'y avait pas Connectiva, Mandrake ou Mandriva serait disparu.
Today, I can tell you that were it not for Connectiva, Mandrake and Mandriva would have been lost.
C'est le marché brésilien qui permet aujourd'hui à Mandriva de s'en sortir.
So it's because of the Brazilian market that Mandriva is alive.
Yeah, Ranesh, would you like to make a very brief intervention? Make it about 2 minutes.
I'll make it 1 minute. So just to take forward Nena's comments about the metaphors and about planes, right? Well, if we think in terms of trains, well, I see the rail cars as free software. So let's have an ecosystem where anyone can make those cars, and the railway tracks as the open standards. There have to be some minimum compliance so that those cars can function, right? and the vestibules connecting one car to the other as open APIs. You need to be able to travel from one car onto the other when you want to move, say, from the pantry car where you get food to where you go and sit. And all of these are required. You need free software, you need open standards, and for especially now with cloud-based services, you need open APIs to be able to move your information around from one location to the other. And just to answer the question by our friend from Brazil, network governance and internet governance is something that many people have written about, and as part of the IGF, right? So Milton Mueller has written an entire book about it called Networks and States, where he looks at the larger sphere of internet governance and sees what kinds of lessons we can learn from IETF, etc. One large chunk of Jeremy Malcolm's book on multi-stakeholderism is focused on this issue, seeing what best lessons we can take from free software project managements and how we can apply them to larger governance structures. So that is an area of interest.
Thank you, Pranesh. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to play the video, which is about another 10-12 minutes. So the video will be here. Anybody who's interested can approach the counter and see that. It's from our friend Fernando, who's based out of Brazil. I'd like to close this session, and in closing, I'd like to make a very brief couple of points. The first point is about the strategy that you adopt to kind of sell, open source to the government. In India, at least in one province where we have converted all the government schools, that's about 2,000 schools with about 500,000 children, to Linux. The strategy that was adopted was not to lobby with the minister or the bureaucrat. It was actually to lobby at the grassroots with the teachers. We got the teachers convinced, and then there was this bottom-up transition that took place. The minister or the bureaucrat at that point was irrelevant, because the teachers decided to kind of convert to open source. So I agree that it's a long way. It is not the short way. It's not the brief way. It's a long haul. But once you do that, it's very sustainable, because as long as the teachers support it, the program right now in the 7th year continues without any problems, despite changes to the government. So the top may change, but if this is there, then it will be sustainable. So do not kind of foreclose your options. There are strategies and there are strategies. And yesterday in the Access and Diversity panel, there was this call, which is based on, again, it might be sound very foolish to the legal people like Mishia here, that there was this call for, based on the open source principles, saying that the legal instruments that was just referred to, which are the 19th century and 20th century legal frameworks trying to govern a technology of the 21st century and finding it very difficult to cope, that we should therefore, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, perhaps start thinking about the Universal Declaration of Internet Rights, which is something somewhat different, and that's forward-looking. And some of these issues, how to kind of lobby with the government. We do not have a legal support framework that will help us to lobby with the minister today or with the government. It is actually a problem. So when you have a new kind of a framework that is futuristic, forward-looking, perhaps we will be there. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my panelists, all the panelists, who have lots more to say. But yes, lots more to say and do, but we don't have the time today in this workshop. On behalf of the organizers of this workshop, once again, thanks to the panelists and to the audience who have raised very thought-provoking questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Right.
Nice panel.
Yeah, it went off well. Yesterday, better than our, we had another workshop yesterday on the disability, access and disability. There were about 3 people in the audience. There were 5 panelists. It was very embarrassing.
Main hall.